Have you ever set boundaries in the beginning of a relationship only to watch them slowly fade away over time? Well, we're going to talk about the importance of boundaries in the different phases of your relationship on this special episode of the Secret Formula of Femininity. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Monteiro, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host and guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine energy, Dr. Nicole. And as you can see, if you've been following for a while, I'm in a different location. Those of you who are listening might not be able to tell, but I am on a cruise ship. And I thought, we're not going to stop the show. This is a great place to keep bringing the content and the topics that are important to you. And one of those is boundaries, but digging deeper, because I think all of us understand that boundaries are important, but the problem is, how do we actually establish and maintain them, especially in our personal and intimate relationships? So we're going to talk about three important phases of relationships. One, courting; two, the honeymoon stage; and three, when you're in it, 5+ years, and how you need to think about boundaries in each of those phases of relationships. So let's start with a story. And it's the story of knowing you need boundaries, but feeling like you either don't know how as the relationship progresses, or you have a pattern of just letting your boundaries go, or on the other hand, just have a pattern of keeping up walls and barriers so your relationships still don't work out. And I hear this over and over. One thing that I hear a lot, a common story, is the woman who bears everything, shares it all in the beginning. And that is a fatal mistake. It's oversharing, which is a sign of a lack of boundaries. And it actually leads to the relationship not being, it doesn't lead to the result that you expected from being so open and sharing with somebody. So we're going to talk about some of the important types of boundaries in the different phases of the relationship, and what some of the challenges are, and then how you can start establishing them. So we know one major phase of a relationship is getting into the relationship. We can call it the courting stage, the getting to know you stage, the deciding if we're going to move forward with this stage. And this is where everyone wants to put their best foot forward. But this is also the opportunity that you won't have at any other stage of the relationship. It's really about vetting, and it's about being honest with yourself about what you want, but also being authentic, and hopefully determining if the other person is authentic. Because it's one of those things where you don't want to buy something with false advertising. You don't want to advertise yourself falsely. And hopefully you can suss out if the other person is advertising falsely, meaning putting the best foot forward, knowing that that doesn't represent truly who that person is. So in the beginning of a relationship, there are some key boundaries that you want to think about. And there's four of them. There's emotional pacing, physical boundaries, time boundaries, and also looking at standards versus boundaries. So let's go through them. Emotional pacing, that relates to that story that I was telling you of, the story of so many women where they bear their soul, they share everything. They in fact they overshare. And this leads to a lot of trauma bonding. I've talked before about the four types of men to avoid for women if they want a healthy relationship. And one of them is the emotional wounded warrior. And this is a man who himself has been through so much trauma, but instead of working through it to move forward, he holds on to it as part of his identity. Therefore, he's someone who also tends to bear all and overshare. Or he has an energy where other women want to overshare because he seems overly understanding. And that may feel good in the beginning, but it doesn't provide an opportunity for emotional pacing. That means don't get attached too soon. Don't overshare. And it's not about the exact timeline, but it's about making sure that you're doing it at a steady pace versus rushing into something feeling all of these chemicals, this adrenaline, feeling like you get a dopamine hit because you feel seen and understood, but then you haven't really taken the time to get to know the person. And that person hasn't really gotten to know you at a steady, slower pace. So you want to have emotional pacing. Do not overshare. Do not. It doesn't mean that you have to be hard and stoic and not show emotion, because as we said, femininity, a lot of it is about being able to allow yourself to be vulnerable. But vulnerability doesn't mean sharing all the information. It just means being open to being in tune with your emotions and sharing how something made you feel. But that doesn't mean you have to tell the whole history of your childhood trauma. That is not what is going to attract a healthy relationship. Instead, that attracts people who either want to exploit that or themselves are in a place of not being fully healed. Now, listen, we all have a story. We all have things that we've been through. And it doesn't mean that that's not a point of commonality or connection with someone, but you don't want that to be the only thing that connects you, right? Because you both want to move forward. So emotional pacing is key. The other thing is physical boundaries. You need to have in mind, first of all, you have to know that you have a right to your physical boundaries. And you need to be able to be intentional about setting the pace for intimacy. That's any kind of intimacy. That's holding hands, touching, that's, being alone together. That could be a kiss, that could be sexual intimacy, sensual intimacy, where, you're talking about things that you wouldn't talk about with other people. You need to be okay setting the pace for this, knowing what's comfortable for you and not feeling like in order to keep this person or have this person like you have to go too quickly. In fact, a lot of times because men are chasers and hunters, the thrill is in the chase. And then if you were not the one or they were never really that intentional about you, then the interest can wane once they get the goal of catching the prey. So you don't want to use the fact that you're not going to have physical boundaries as a way to attract or try to keep this man or this relationship. The inner kind of boundary is time boundaries. You need to be able to balance your dating life with your personal life. Don't always be available. You had a life before meeting this person. You will have a life as you continue this relationship with them. So you need to be able to balance seeing them. Yeah, you don't have to be fake and playing hard to get, but you don't want to be overly available. Number one, because that takes away from the things you have going on. And number two, again, it's about that pacing. And if you just give everything away for free so quickly in the beginning, your time, your body, your mind, your emotions, then you're leaving too little to the imagination. And the fourth thing is standards versus boundaries. You have to know what is non negotiable for you. Boundaries are like, I tell people, boundaries are like the bushes around you. They're permeable, they're not walls. They are things that protect you, show the limits of what you have. And sometimes they can shift, they can change over time, clearly. And standards are things that are important to you that you want to have or expect in a relationship. And some of those are going to be non-negotiable. Like if the person, for example, if you don't want to date a smoker, you just don't. If you don't want to be with someone who has kids, you just don't, right? I encourage every woman to really look at their non negotiables and make sure that list isn't super, super long. Look at some things that are maybe, there's some wiggle room and look at the things that are truly not negotiable in this future relationship. Now, some of the challenges early on when establishing boundaries in the courting phase are fear of rejection for seeming difficult. And that's where you have to balance your feminine energy. It doesn't mean to be harsh, direct, and dry. Now, there are cases when you are going to want to. If someone is trying to cross a physical boundary or a space boundary or a sexual intimacy boundary, you need to let them know, no, that is not acceptable. But you don't have to be mean about establishing your boundaries. You just need to be clear on them. So don't worry about being too difficult because that is a fear that usually has women being too loose with their boundaries. They don't want to seem mean, so they overshare. They don't want to seem closed off, so they end up being intimate too soon. They don't want to seem like they're not interested, so they end up not having time boundaries. So you really want to be aware that it's not being difficult. It's all about how you deliver the message about your boundary. It's all about your delivery of your boundaries, but having the boundaries doesn't make you difficult. The other thing is when you go too quickly, you can ignore red flags due to being attracted to the person. Like I said, there's all of these chemicals going on. There's dopamine, there's adrenaline, there's this rush of like desire and anticipation, and it can literally cloud your judgment as if you're high. So if you don't take it slowly, if you don't think about things beforehand, or if you're not intentional, that attraction can have you ignoring every red flag that later on you're going to be like, what was I thinking? So, what do you do in this early stage of the relationship? Two main things. One is you set boundaries early, and two is you communicate your expectations with grace and confidence. That's that delivery part. So, don't wait until things have gone too far to then go back and set boundaries. It's always easier in the beginning, and then you can loosen them a little bit if you feel like it. But it's harder to have loose boundaries and then later on try to get harsh and rough and say, no, don't call me at this time, or no, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that. Not to say you can never change your mind, but it is so much easier and clearer if you establish them earlier on in the relationship. You can say things like, I'm only available for dates on the weekend, or I don't talk during the daytime because I'm busy, but I can text you when I get off, things like that. So it's the communication and knowing that it's easier to loosen your boundaries than it is to make them firmer over time. Okay. So the second phase is that honeymoon stage. So you've passed the courting stage, the getting to know you. You all have decided we are making this happen. And I see this with a lot of early marriages, that we always call that the honeymoon stage, the first 1 to 2 years. You're happy, you're excited, you're in a blissful mood, and then things slowly start to get real. And so some of the key boundaries that you need to be mindful of are maintaining your individuality, not losing yourself just because you are in love and starting this new relationship. Emotional regulation. So managing your expectations and learning not to take everything personally. This is particularly important with conflicts because when we get into conflicts, it's new. We don't know necessarily how disagreements and anger and all of that is going to play out in this early part of the relationship. And so it's important that we regulate our emotions. We not get overly angry or jump to conclusions too quickly. We have to have some confidence in the fact that we vetted this person and we went through the earlier courting stage in a way that was healthy. So we had those boundaries in the beginning. So it's so important not to jump to conclusions, not to get so upset that you go telling your business to everybody and then they have input and opinions about your relationship that just are not helpful for you. So you learning to ground yourself and regulate your own emotions, not overreacting, being in touch with what you feel. Journaling is a great tool for people in the early honeymoon stage of their relationship because it helps them to get really clear with what they're feeling. And then social boundaries are also important in the honeymoon stage. That is where you're balancing time with friends, family, your partner, the rest of your life. And sometimes it may need conversations with some of your friends and family to say, hey, this is I'm married now, or this is my relationship. Things may shift. I may not be available every weekend to do these things with you. And I think it's important to have those conversations early on so that you don't feel like you're stuck between pleasing your friends and family and pleasing your partner. You want to feel like you can have healthy relationships with all of them. But everybody has to understand that relationships shift. So when you're first married, that's where your energy goes. And friends and family have to understand it doesn't mean that you're abandoning them, but also you want to still maintain your who you are. We all have that need for both intimacy and closeness, as well as individuality and separateness. So you don't want to get overly enmeshed where you forget who you are. because later on, you want to know who you are and remember who you are, but also it's what keeps the relationship fresh and exciting and new, that there's always an interest that your partner has in getting to know you more and more and more, and vice versa. So, some of the challenges in this honeymoon stage with boundaries is that you can over romanticize the relationship and not work on compatibility issues. So just because there's some incompatibility doesn't mean it has to be over, but those are you incompatible means that there's some key conflicts or disagreements that you aren't easily resolved. And you may need to really sit and talk about them, work through them, get some outside professional help to communicate about them and learn how to compromise. And so being able to really face those issues head on, despite being head over heels with being in this new relationship, is really important. Also, another challenge is that you have a hard time balancing other areas of your life. And so you are either doing so much with still with your family and friends, or you're doing everything with your partner or your spouse, and they don't even have time for themselves and to nurture, their individual interests. So the key to a lasting relationship is recognizing that it's a marathon and not a sprint. So there's going to be plenty of time to continue to build with each other, spend time with each other. So to keep it a little interesting, and you'll hear me say that a lot because that is key in a healthy long-term relationship. You want to maintain the things that your partner was interested in you for in the first place. So your hobbies, your personal goals and interests, and you want to share those with them so they can continue to get to know you. Also, you want to set healthy conflict boundaries. This is an important phase of the relationship to set some clear non negotiables in how you handle conflict. One thing is, what are your no go phrases? I always tell couples, don't threaten divorce, don't get physical, don't force someone to, try to be in the space with you when maybe they need to get away and have their own space. Respect each other and have some rules of engagement, rules of fair play when it comes to how you're going to handle conflict. Now, if you've made it past the courting stage, if you are in, 5+ years, you've made it past the honeymoon stage, you are in it to win it. And this is where you can feel a little comfortable in your relationship. You're committed, you're building together, but this is also where sometimes relationships break down. And so, some key boundaries in the 5+ years of relationship are respecting each other's personal space. And I have a funny story about that, right? That allows you to each maintain your sense of self, your sense of you have your own space. Financial boundaries. So being able to deal with money, talk about it openly. Financial distress and stress is a major cause of breakdown in relationships. And it's usually because people think about money and finances differently and they haven't really discussed those things. Also, emotional labor, balancing responsibilities and communicating so that you don't build up resentment. So much of relationship breakdown at this phase or even later on has to do with unspoken built up resentments. The woman is mad that she felt like she was carrying all the emotional load. The man is mad because he felt like he was carrying burdens and couldn't communicate with her. And these resentments build up and no one says anything. And then later on, somebody has an affair. Someone suddenly says, I want a divorce, or they check out mentally and emotionally. The other key boundary here is maintaining attraction and keeping the romance alive. Cue to what I said earlier, which is keeping that interest. Romance, sensuality, and attraction are not just physical, they are also mental. So they relate to how you are excited about and are intrigued and want to continue to get to know the different parts of your partner. And this is something that never stops, right? People who stay married find interest and are curious about their partners because we all change throughout life. So it's like you get the pleasure of continuing to get to know a person, even though you've been with them. And you also get the benefit of having that familiarity, right? So attraction thrives on both being familiar enough to be comfortable with that person, but also that there's some anticipation, excitement, things that you would love to continue to do and learn with that person that are new and exciting. So you want to keep that attraction alive. Two key challenges that I see at this stage in the relationship are being overly familiar so that you take each other for granted. Like, oh, I know he won't care. I know she doesn't care. I always tell women, stop walking around without grooming yourself and not looking right. It is so important to communicate to your partner that you're not taking them for granted just because you've been together for umpteen years, as we like to say. And the other is avoiding difficult conversations about needs and desires. It can feel like, okay, why do we have to keep focusing and talking and dealing with these things? Well, because you're two separate people, you're going to have changing needs, changing desires. And if you don't communicate about them or have the difficult conversations, you're going to be pulled apart. And again, like I said, these cases where there's a sudden desire for divorce or breakup, or someone has mentally or emotionally checked out or had an affair, this is because the difficult things you avoid the difficult conversations. So some things you can do are regularly check in on each other's needs and boundaries. Don't wait for them to bring it up. If you notice something or you feel that energy shifting, ask them and share with them what you notice. Ask them what they need, what they're feeling. Bring it up. Also, keep the relationship dynamic alive. Do not take your partner for granted. Still do date nights or try to do new experiences together. And don't forget your self care. Keep yourself looking good, feeling good in a space where you're pouring into yourself so that you can pour into your partner. And that way, when life's downs come, because we know there's ups and downs in life, when those come in your relationship, you have a reserve of support and goodwill with each other to help carry you through. Now, a common mistake that I see in relationships in all stages are that you assume your partner should just know your boundaries. You haven't communicated anything, you haven't said anything. You just assume that everybody should know that. Or why shouldn't somebody treat you the way you want to be treated? Well, maybe they don't know exactly, right? The other thing that I see happen a lot is setting rigid, inflexible boundaries that don't allow for growth. You are going to change. That's why I said it's easier to start with boundaries that are a little formal. That's why I said it's easier to start with boundaries that are a little firmer and then you can loosen them over time. But you got to be willing to not be rigid because you're growing, they're growing, and you all are changing in this relationship. And then also failing, especially in the beginning, to reinforce boundaries with action. I have heard stories of women talking about someone stole money from them or lied on them or cheated or did something with one of their friends or family members, egregious things. And then they decide, oh, well, everybody's human. I'll just forgive them. They don't make sure that this person is truly remorseful. They don't do anything to ensure that the person understands they're not going to accept it again. They don't enforce any consequences for their boundaries being so severely crossed like that. And what it does is it sends the message that you're all talk and no action, that people can just literally walk all over you and it won't mean a thing because you're going to just let them do it over and over and over again. All right, so it's question time. I have a great question from a listener. She said, my partner and I have been together for years, and I feel like I've let too many things slide. How do I reset boundaries without causing conflict? That is such a great question because it's a common situation. So the key is to frame it as growth. Remember, I said with boundaries, it's about your delivery. Instead of saying something that's like, I need new boundaries, or that feels like it's blaming your partner, you can take ownership of it yourself. You can say, I've realized that I need X, Y, and Z, or these things to feel my best in the relationship. That way, you frame it as a mutual benefit that in order for me to show up as my best self and pour into this relationship and into you, I need certain things. And I want to share and communicate those with you. Okay. So when you recognize that you need a reset, that's a great thing. And it's just about how you communicate it and frame it as a mutual benefit for both of you in the growth of the relationship. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to explore my Inner Circle membership, the Boundaries to Bliss Society, where I help women set and maintain boundaries for love, happiness, and self worth. You can also check out my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, for women who are finally ready to win at love. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Don't forget to like and share, comment, leave us a review. It makes the world of difference. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, and share with another woman that you know needs this. Until the next episode, back in the regular studio, I'm Dr. Nicole. Take care.